Welcome to Like a Champion podcast, where we talk to leaders from all walks of life. This is episode 3 with Ted Christie, CEO of Spirit Airlines. Spirit is a South Florida-based airline commercial carrier, 8th largest in the U.S. They have routes throughout the United States, the Caribbean and Latin America. And Ted talks about transforming Spirit's image in addition to work-life balance as CEO and becoming the best airline on earth. I know that sounds modest. Ted was a great interview. Really enjoyed his perspective on changing the attitude and opinions regarding Spirit Airlines being originally a low-cost carrier and sort of turning that around and what that entailed in terms of their attitude amongst employees and the perception in the public light. And just really enjoyed this interview and hope you do too. This is episode 3, Like a Champion podcast. Hope you enjoy. We're going, Ted. Thanks for coming on. I wanted to jump in. I know you've got a busy schedule and very challenging time for the airline industry. So you've been doing this 18 years. Have you ever confronted a time as challenging as what you are right now in the airline industry?
No, this is the true blackest of black swans for our industry. I think for the broader macroeconomic environment, to be honest. But I joined the airline industry right after 9/11, so the business was still recovering post that crisis. So I kind of tasted, what was happening in that environment. And of course, since then we've seen other pandemic shocks, nothing of this nature, but we had SARS and H1N1, and there was an Ebola scare a few years ago, which you may remember. Of course, the great financial crisis, oil spiking to $150 a barrel, which has a dramatic impact on the transportation industry and the airline industry. Yeah. So we've seen all of those things before. This one dwarfs all of that, even combined. We've never dealt with anything like this before, and talking with the team a lot about it as we've been kind of navigating this. This is a career-defining event for a lot of people, and in that respect, I've encouraged them. It's hard to think of this as a learning event when you're going through it, because it feels like a constant sit-up, like you're just constantly like in a crunch. But, you got to look around every once in a while and try to soak in what's happening, because this is going to have a dramatic impact on how you think about life and how you think about your career and, how you're dealing with your family and all that stuff. So it's quite unusual. I'm sure you're facing similar things in your own life and with your own family. And it's, it's very unusual for sure.
Yeah, everything pretty much in my world put on hold. In a world doing business transactions, it's, in March, came to a screeching halt. So yeah, I can certainly relate to that. And one interesting thing because we're generalists and we deal with lots of different types of business owners, some people are just, if not even affected by this crisis, they're doing even better as a result, different type of sectors where, they're dealing direct to consumer. I mean, obviously, anybody that has a model where they're, selling product online and shipping directly to consumer, and then shifting over to real estate, you see a lot of these drive-through restaurants, or if you don't have one now, these fast casual restaurant chains are quickly shifting over to this model of drive-throughs, and there's not enough real estate out there that's zoned properly for that. So there's pockets of people doing great, and then there's pockets of people here, especially in South Florida, as because you live here, bars and restaurants, bars have been shut down since March.
I guess until Saturday, right? This was like a new thing, new news, but you're right. I mean, tough for the travel and hospitality business is taking it on the chin. That's where it all is. The cruise industry, the airline industry, the restaurant and bar industry, the hoteliers, the theme parks, and that's all Florida. I mean, you think about it, so our state has just taken a massive hit.
Yeah, boat sales are absolutely through the roof. And
are they?
Anybody that I know that sells boats, which I know quite a few people, have had record years, because think about it, especially for that 2-month lockdown period. All you could do, you could go out and boat with your family if you had one. And if you were
Yeah,
thinking
that's right.
about buying one, you bought one. So inventory is way down. And there's people I know that, for people that don't know listening, the Fort Lauderdale International Boat Show here is the largest in the world. And there's people going, I talked to people from Boston Whaler, and they said, we're only going because we want to keep our spot, not because we have any inventory, because we sold it all. It's such a strange disparity, binary between, affected horribly by this. So I saw that I was looking at TSA stats this morning that the airline industry is now up over about 30% of last year's travel volume. It may sound right. My wife flew Spirit on Thursday and had a great experience to Austin.
Good.
So, but that's the first time she or I have been on an airplane since March.
Okay.
So can you talk to me? I think there's probably a lot of misunderstanding about risk associated COVID related with flying. And you were explaining some of this to me the other day. Can you talk to me about, risk of contracting virus as far as your knowledge goes?
Yeah, it's one of the misconceptions, I guess, that we and our peers in the industry are collectively trying to address. Well, one of the things that's kind of fed that is this feeling that when you're on a tube and you're isolated and you're right next to a bunch of people, and there's incorrect information about what's happening to the air on board the airplane, all that stuff. People have a general fear about that, proximity and all that stuff. But the truth of the matter is that our industry and the equipment that we operate, the airplanes that we fly, have been modernized over the last 40 years to the point, and in some cases intentionally designed to address this specific issue, which is the transmission of communicable diseases. And so that the safety on board the airplane, and safety is what the airline industry has always been about. It's the number one thing we think about. And I think we've shown that our industry has made dramatic strides since deregulation in improving the safety of our business across the board. But it's broadly not understood what's happening when you get on an airplane. So since the crisis, Spirit specifically, and I know a lot of our peers have done the same thing, we've implemented a multi-layered approach to make people to assure people that they're going to be safe and comfortable on board our airplanes. It starts with kind of regular disinfection of the airplane. In fact, that's been improved since the crisis. We now fog the aircraft with an antimicrobial agent that actually adheres to surfaces directly and kills the virus on contact. That's good for up to 30 days. We refog the airplane every 10. We do regular, we wipe down all of the high touch surfaces on every turn. So every time the airplane lands, we're wiping down the buckles and the armrests and the tray tables and the lavatories and the door and handles and all that stuff. So that's really the first step. The second is the air quality on board an airplane. I referred to this earlier, is akin or actually better than you would find in an operating room in a hospital. So, and these things are rated based on how rapidly the air is recirculated through the facility, be it airplane or room or whatever, and then what type of filtration system you have. And the best you can have there is a HEPA filter, which all modern aircraft have. And then the air on board the airplane is actually recirculated every 2 to 3 minutes, which is faster than you'll find in an operating room. Add to that the actual airflow on board the airplane is vertical because it's coming in at your head and exiting at your feet. So all that's pushing particulate and all that down. So it's filtering out about 99.97% of all particulates, which include viruses, and creating an environment that's actually safer than you'll find, in any hospital operating room. And then the last piece is we mandated facial coverings on board the airplane just to make sure that there was an additional layer. And there have already been studies done, and the airline industry broadly is commissioning some additional work to confirm it. But some work's already been done by MIT, by the folks at Airbus, by the folks at Boeing, that show that when you do all these things, the risk of transmission approaches zero, even when you're sitting next to somebody. So it's great news. What we have to do is do a great job at trying to get that out, right? Make people comfortable.
I think like the historical perception was that you're flying in an airplane for 3 hours, you're breathing the same air for 3 hours.
That's right.
I think the average person thinks that. I was definitely guilty of that before our last conversation. So
Yeah.
that was a conversation that was very interesting to me. And for somebody that's read a lot about COVID and transmission through contact tracing studies, you mentioned another key fact about the flow of air, and the big studies that they did early on that we had access to were in Korea at conferences that happened in South Korea, where people were sitting at lunch at a table for long periods of time having lunch, but then the people that were in the table next to where the airflow in the room was happening, those were people that got infected, but people that were outside of that airflow did not at all. So if you're talking about air going from top to bottom, that is such a key component of that, I think. And so
yeah.
when you explain that to me, I was like, man, I have to like put that on here because I thought that was so interesting. And it looks like
it's not intuitive, right? I mean, I would have thought prior to working in the industry what you thought, which is, well, it's the same air. It's just kind of going like this. And really we're bringing in fresh air every 2 to 3 minutes. And that's the part that people didn't appreciate either.
Yeah. I was thinking, pressurized cabin.
Yeah.
Same air, just filtering it. But anyway, so yeah, that's really interesting. So switching gears, I was interested to hear from you. You came out of college as an economist, right? And then you made the switch over to the airline industry, which has always been my perception is very, very competitive, high capital expenditure, to some degree, volatile, for reasons that you mentioned earlier with oil prices and all of the different calamities that we experienced. Like, what drew you to the airline industry? Certainly not an easy path considering, and then obviously a lot of, scrutiny from media and safety issues. I mean, any little thing that goes wrong usually ends up on the news. So I'm just very curious as to what drew you there, or did it happen by accident, or talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, it was, you mentioned the media. I mean, people love to talk about airlines. Everybody's used them. Everyone's got their story.
Yeah.
And so that usually stimulates plenty of conversation. So it's definitely an intriguing industry in that regard. You've got big, sophisticated machinery. You got, aerodynamic theory. You've got a highly levered business, like you said, both financially and operationally levered. And so all those things combined make it, and it's strategic, and there's a lot of competition, like you said. So it's kind of fascinating. But I kind of find my way into it on a happy accident, to be honest. It wasn't a career plan, anyways. Between the time I was doing econometric work, and I had kind of a, coming out of school, I had a degree in finance, but I almost had enough credit hours to have a dual major in political science because I had some interest in getting involved in policy. And that's what led me to work for the state government and eventually found my way doing, as an economist at the taxing authority, the Department of Revenue in Arizona. But between that period of time and working for the airline industry, I did work for an equipment leasing company, so a financial business. Yeah. And so I learned a lot about asset financing and practical applications of the stuff you study in school, which was kind of neat. But it was a small boutique firm that did middle market transactions, and so the deal team was largely myself doing the structuring of the transaction, financial structuring, the pricing of the transaction, pricing the residual of the equipment, and then the general counsel. That was the deal team. We papered it and negotiated it.
Yeah.
Well, and this was all happening when I lived in Denver, and he made a decision that it was time for him to go do something else, and he got recruited to be the general counsel at Frontier Airlines, which was the hometown, lower cost carrier, smaller carrier in Denver. But he and I had struck up such a great relationship. When he left, he said, well, we'll stay in touch. And this is the benefit of networking and always staying in touch, never burning bridges, and, doing your best to build good relationships wherever you work, because you never know what's going to happen. And he called me about 3 months after he left, and he said, hey, look, the CFO could really use a hand here. And Frontier was a public company, publicly traded at the time, small, but nonetheless had that kind of intrigue around it and the kind of things you would learn about that. And so I met with the CFO, and he was relatively new to the job. He had come in just around the time 9/11 happened, to be honest, with Frontier. So they were digging their way out of that. And he said, "Look, I've got an accounting group that does the books, and I think they're effective at that. And I've got a guy or two or three people that handle the budget, but I really don't have a financial planning group, and I don't have a treasury group. And by don't have it, it's not like he didn't have the right people in the jobs. He had 0 people doing that. So he was doing all of that work. And he said, basically, if you come work for me, I'll teach it to you." And so I was like, when am I at this stage in my life going to get the opportunity to go work for the CFO of a public company and basically do whatever I wanted to do, as long as I was good at it or hungry enough? And so I took the leap. I actually took a pay cut. And at the time my wife was pregnant with our first child. And so she had decided to leave her job. So this was like an economic family decision too. And so I went over to work for him, and it became that. It was that he and I immediately developed a good relationship, and he just started kind of, anytime I said, "Well, I'm kind of curious about that," or "I feel like I found something," he would be like, "You go do that." Because it was one more thing that he didn't have to worry about.
Yeah, that's
yeah.
You really got to make your mark there and build your resume and learn the industry when it was all really the result of a personal connection, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't like an open job, posting and you.
I just sort of kind of, like you said, I just kind of happy accident fell into it, and it worked out, well. It like you said, it's a volatile business, and there have been ups and downs in my career, but I've really enjoyed it.
And then, so you were there for how long, and then made the switch over to Spirit?
I was there for about 8 years. And that story is, a book in and of itself, because Frontier went through ups and downs. It eventually had to go through a court-sponsored restructuring and file for Chapter 11 during the Great Financial Crisis. And that was the point I got a battlefield promotion into the CFO job there, because they needed help. And so I ended up running the restructuring of that business. And then we sold that company to another airline. So that was another fascinating thing, participating in a transaction there like that. And then the CEO and I had bonded during that window of time, and he and I formed a consulting company. We did a little bit of work for a while, and then we jointly went in and took the CEO, CFO job at a publicly traded regional airline called Pinnacle. Mm-hmm. They fly regional jets on behalf of Delta and United and US Airways at the time. And a reasonably good sized airline, actually 300 or so airplanes and that kind of thing. But they were in a pinch as well. And we had kind of built a brand a little bit about a management team that could fix problems. And so they asked us to go work for them. And I was doing that for about a year when Spirit called me. I looked at what Spirit, at the time, this was in 2012, okay. Spirit had just gone public. They were about 35 airplanes, so relatively small airline in the United States. And you could
mainly, were they doing the Caribbean then, or
they were doing a little bit of that? Yeah. So they basically had, we live in Fort Lauderdale, so they had that market in and out of the Caribbean, and then to the Northeast and a few select places in the Midwest, and they were getting as far as Vegas and LA, but it was, 35 airplanes. There's only so much you can do. But they were doing that, and they had turned themselves into this ultra low cost carrier model, which was intended to stimulate activity. The economic theory here is pretty unsophisticated, but well proven, which is when you have a commoditized or a relatively commoditized product and you lower the price, more people do it. It's just supply and demand, right? And so they tested that theory with this model, and it was working. and you could see it happening, but no one really knew about them at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And they had a fractured relationship with the consuming public, which I'm sure we'll get to in a second, but they, which had reasons, which I'll explain, but nonetheless they had that. And so the brand was a little tarnished, but the financial activity was picking up, and you could see it in the numbers. And so when they called me, I was immediately fascinated. I was like, this thing could be, this is not going to be a 35 airplane airline. When done correctly, this thing could really take over. So I left the other opportunity, and then came here in 2012, and here we are 8 years plus from that. And now Spirit's 155 airplanes, so it's almost 5 times the size. And I think that experiment has now proven to be something that's changed the airline industry. And I don't say that egotistically, because I was not a part of the management team or the group that actually redesigned the product. But when you look at the way you buy tickets today, the way you travel, the concept of a basic economy fare on a big carrier, unbundling of services, allowing you to buy your bags separately and all that stuff, and the competition around low fares and reducing fares anywhere we fly, that's all because of what the Spirit model has done. And so it's been a generational shift in the way airlines, it's akin to the 1980s when Southwest was really growing.
Mm-hmm.
They changed the business. The Spirit and the people who are doing a model like this now are changing it again.
So yeah, let's dig into, you alluded to this earlier. When you came to Spirit, they were already a low cost carrier, but I think the perception was that it came at the expense of the experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there was the old, it was a 60 Minutes that I saw, and it was this old sort of maybe even urban legend that there was, no suggestion box, or customer complaints went unread in a big pile, and, these kinds of myths. But, that was the public perception. I would love to hear, what and I know you came to Spirit, you weren't immediately the CEO. That happened, I think, January of 19, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You were a part of the executive team there, and that took place from. I would just love to hear sort of the inside initiative to change that public perception to where the consumer could have both, right? They could have that low cost option and actually have, the positive customer service experience, not necessarily with frills, but you get on the airplane and you want to buy food and drink, and you can do that. But I would just love to hear that experience, and just how you change that perception, even the mentality of the people working within the company, eliminating any types of preconceived sort of disposition to, defeatist, mentality, where I'm sure it's probably difficult if you're, for your gate agents and your customer facing employees to be dealing with that perception that's thrust upon them, even if they are delivering that superior product.
Yeah, all you're hitting on all the right points, and I'll do my best to summarize. You feel free to pop in, but it is quite a fascinating case study. And it was part of what I was witnessing when I was looking at what Spirit might be. Everyone who works at Spirit always wanted us to be the best airline in the world. That's never not been true. And that I think that's an important point. The people here are proud of their business. They're proud of what we do. I'll start by telling a little story, if that's okay, about my first 3 months on the job. And I was aware of the reputation that Spirit had garnered as of that point when I took the opportunity. But I knew that the economics of the business, when coupled with an exercise in quality, could produce a value proposition for the consumer that was unprecedented. So we had work to do, and that's fine. You don't come to a job to babysit it, right? You come because you think you can do something. So I was on the job for about 3 months, and we got to take our first leisure trip as a family. And we were going back to Arizona, where my wife and I both have our parents, and Spirit has a connecting flight over Dallas. And it's same flight today. We still have that same kind of Fort Lauderdale, Dallas, Phoenix connection. So we were boarding the airplane here in Fort Lauderdale, and I was, I had the girls, and they were younger then. You've met my girls, and they're older now, but they were younger then, and so they were wearing their princess backpacks and their pink outfits or whatever. We were boarding the airplane, and there was an elderly couple behind us, and they were interacting with my daughters, how cute you guys are, and that sort of thing. And they turn around and say, "My daddy works for this airline," right? So when you're at that time, I didn't know
it's going either way.
Right. You don't know, right? And I'm not ashamed of my company, but I know that we had a reputation, right? And I turned and introduced myself. How do you do? I'm Ted Christie. I'm the CFO here at Spirit. It's very nice to meet you. Thank you for being with us today, that kind of thing. And these folks said to me, I want you to know that, and they were in their late 60s, and they said, our whole life, we live in Dallas, by the way, our whole life, we wanted to do nothing other than get to the Caribbean. We live a modest life. It's been a lifelong dream for us to explore it. And we've never been able to think about it or afford it until Spirit started serving Dallas. And we were able to finally build a vacation in our retirement around this. And it's been extremely meaningful for the two of us. And I wanted to say thank you. Wow. So that was my first, what we call our guest interaction. And I was like, I knew it. This is what I'm talking about, right? As long as we can do it well, we can have a demonstrable impact on the traveling. We can basically create what is a luxury good, which is the idea, the aspirational good of travel, right? It's got that kind of like unspoken value, and you can deliver that to a broader audience. That's a powerful brand, right? So getting to the point is, I was aware that we had our missteps. We had cheeky advertising that was out there that was like intended to kind of bring eyeballs to the site. You were around in Florida at the time. You may have seen some of that stuff. Our operational execution was less than stellar, so we were often late. And we canceled too many flights. And there's reasons for that. We were trying to carve out our space. We were trying to create a business. We were trying to prove to the market that the low-cost model could work. And so we had to focus on certain things at certain times. It's just about evolution. And so once it became clear that we actually had a business that would work, then you could turn your attention to all the things that you wanted to do to improve it. So around 2015, we started to make real strides in improving the operational execution of the business, which we knew would be the next the next side of the value proposition. So you can deliver low fares, great. But if you can deliver low fares and be reliable, and you have the newest fleet in the industry, and your airplanes are clean and your staff is friendly, if you couple all that, despite the fact that we offer a model that is a la carte, like you said, we charge separately for items, but all of that's intended to reduce the fare. And the data that we produce and the government requires us to produce on their behalf, and then they consolidate it, validates that while we do charge separately for bags and seat assignment and, like you said, food on board, our fare has gone down by almost the same amount over that period of time. So the collective amount that you pay is still lower than it was before. And we've been able to do that through efficiency and productivity. So we thought, okay, we can deliver low fares, but if we can do it with all this other stuff, now we got a brand. Right now we're getting somewhere. Yeah, and so beginning around 2015, 2016, we started to really invest in the tools to make the operation hum. And so we went from routine basement dweller in on-time performance, what we call completion factor, which is how frequently you cancel flights, the amount of complaints that we receive through the DOT, that's measured by the Department of Transportation, and then they report that as well. Yeah, right. And then The last is mishandled bag performance. How often do you lose your checked baggage? All those things, we were routinely, bottom dwellers. And we started to chip away at that and move ourselves up the ranking. Last year, out of the 10 reporting airlines, we were number 4 in on-time performance. We were number 4 in completion factor, and we were in the top 3 in bag performance. And all of that translated into a much improved 70% reduction in complaint ratio filed by the DOT. Wow. And then this year, despite the pandemic, through the end of last month, which is the last reportable month, we were number 2 in on-time performance of the 10 reporting carriers, number 1 in completion factor. And our bag performance has been cut in half, meaning we've lost half as many bags as we lost last year. So the way we measure guest satisfaction, either through the number of complaints we receive at the DOT or our own measure of, you're probably familiar with the statistic called Net Promoter Score, which is you're surveying customers of yours and you give them a question, and the question is usually, would you recommend XYZ product to your family or friends? Mm-hmm. And then you give them a 10 box. 10 is most likely to agree, 1 is least likely to agree. That's a very sophisticated human behavioral modeling question. And you can learn a lot about how human behavior just from that one question. So it delivers a score, which is a net promoter score, meaning are you creating brand value? Our net promoter score is up, tenfold in 3 years. So now we're starting, not only have we got a model that works, people like low fares, not surprisingly, but if you can deliver that with all those other things, you can deliver a brand value that people like, and they start to attach themselves to that brand. Mm-hmm. And they start to form allegiance with that brand, and they start to get loyalty with that brand, and they become promoters of that brand in social media and with their friends and that kind of thing. And that's the tailwind that we're only starting to see. We still have the hangover of the past that we have to diffuse. But what we're now trying to convince people is, I know you may have had a bad experience on us 5 years ago, and it's been 5 years since you tried it. You got to try us now. It's a completely different airline. And so it's actually it's a lot of fun. And the people who work here want that. They want a quality product. They want to feel good about it. And so this has been the most positive team member project we've ever had too, because now the frontline workers, the flight attendants, the pilots, the people at the airport, the mechanics, all those people are like, hey, we're killing it. This is great.
Yeah, you guys are a rising star in that sense, right? They're one of my favorite quotes, and I'm going to paraphrase, is by Mike Krzyzewski, the Duke basketball coach, who's all-time winningest basketball in history. And he's basically saying, deep down inside, all of us ever really want is to be a part of something bigger than ourselves, right? And just to say that you're a part of that, and not that you're the sole reason, but just to be a part of something bigger than yourselves is something that I think brings way more job satisfaction than any paycheck could ever bring you. And that's a really cool thing that you have that sort of buy-in. I have 2 questions, but the first one is, I'm sure there's a metric for it that you track. I don't know the name, but my guess is that if you can get somebody to either A, try Spirit for the first time, or B, try it for the first time and you called it 5 years or so, the likelihood that they're going to fly again, as opposed to somebody that that flies but doesn't fly you.
Yeah,
I'd imagine there's a metric there of winning that sort of first time business that you guys would probably strive for, I would guess.
Yeah. So there's 2 ways to look at it. The first is every guest on Spirit, after they travel, immediately gets a survey in their inbox, and not everyone responds to it, right? But the response rate on those surveys, based on our experience and us looking at how other consumer goods products are done, our response rates are amongst the highest we've ever seen. So, which is actually a really positive thing, because that means people are willing to tell you what they think. They're not always positive, but that's okay. They're willing to tell you. So that tells us about their satisfaction immediately upon that event. So it's happening right then when it's fresh. And that'll give you an insight as to whether or not your product is actually improving. That's Net Promoter Score, which is what I alluded to earlier. So the fact that that metric continues to, in multipliers, get better tells us that we're delivering upon our promise. The second is we measure repeat rate. So how often do you come back to us after you've traveled? And that varies for a leisure carrier, which is what we do. We carry people when they're going to vacation. We carry people when they're going to see their family and friends. The repeat rate on leisure business isn't the same as it would be as if you're a regular business traveler. But nonetheless, we measure it if you repeat on us every 6 months or every year or every 18 months. And those repeat rates are up dramatically too.
Wow.
So in any way we look at it, we're clearly making the right decisions. I don't know if we've made them all fast enough. I don't know if they're going up as fast as anyone would like, but I can tell you that they're definitely going up. And that's what gives the group energy to say, okay, well, we can make the next move and let's see what happens with that. So it's almost like having a new toy every day. And yes, we're in a pandemic right now, so everything's kind of disrupted, but we don't view this as a paradigm shift in our business. This is a speed bump. People will want to come back and travel. Your wife made her trip. I don't know if that was for business or leisure, but was it?
Yes.
But people will want to go see their mom and dad again soon. And they will want to, they may not feel comfortable yet going to places like Spain or Japan, but they might go to Orlando or they might go to Vegas. And so that stuff will happen. And when it does, we're continuing to try to improve along the way.
I think that's great. I think I mentioned one of my first jobs out of college was working. My dad was an exotic car dealer, and one of his flagship franchises was Jaguar. And this was around 2000. He opened a dealership in Fort Myers, and I said, I'm going to go sell Jaguars. And I was very enamored with the idea of sales, and it's a trade that I wanted to learn. I thought was very important to learn as part of my career. And so I go over there, and my dad had been, demoing Jags for years as a dealer, and they were always great. And then we started, I was 15, 16 years old. So my historical knowledge of the vehicle was limited. And I remember going up there, and it was astounding. At the time, Jaguar was making actually phenomenal cars, initial quality. We had very little issues of cars coming back through service for, nagging issues. But historically, for those, most of you probably know, back in the 80s, Jaguar and before had a horrendous reputation, specifically for electronic issues. And so people would come through and look at us like, it's still a beautiful car, but man, I just know it's going to be in the shop all the time. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Read the J.D. Power surveys. They're amazing. They're quality. Ford bought them and spent hundreds of millions in R&D perfecting the car and getting things ironed out. And they weren't making money, but they were making great cars. And it was just, it was such an amazing psychological experiment to me to see how people could come in. And obviously they weren't necessarily going to trust me to give them an honest opinion of the vehicle, but it took a lot of time. And the fact that you guys got that linear sort of growth and the customer confidence that you have and the flyers coming back and repeat, and that's really encouraging. And I'd say if things are good now and you're profitable now as a whole, sort of outside of the pandemic, that's a great trend, and exciting. But there's probably more bait to cut out there in terms of of that consumer. I can tell you, I think the reason my wife flew Spirit, one of the reasons was I told her the last few times I've went over the last, couple of years have been positive experiences. So go ahead and book that flight. You shouldn't allow your, previous conceived notions to divert you elsewhere. And so that was kind of case in point. But so but one of the things that caught me in reading your bio was that you came to Spirit and you were promoted to CEO from within. And I feel like, correct me if I'm wrong, that's probably less often the case and with publicly traded companies that officers at your position were promoted from within. You came from the numbers CFO side. I'm just curious as to, what the circumstances were when they said, all right, Ted, we want you to be the guy, when that spot became available, and why they had the confidence in you.
Yeah, I think, obviously the first point you made, I think that's very industry specific. So I think that you have seen examples. What you're referencing is that you may see public company CEOs, come from the outside or in a related industry, but they'll move into the business. In our industry, we are kind of like insular. I don't mean it, in a bad way, but a lot of the times the CEOs they tend to move up from within. If you look across the business today, you look at the guys running the airlines today, most of them are internal promotes.
Okay.
Or they came from another airline in the position ready to be promoted.
Right.
So it's probably because, the business is so weird. It's all the things you said in the beginning. It's financially levered, operationally levered, capital intensive, competitive. There's a lot of jargon and stuff. And so people tend to kind of just like, you develop your expertise around it. But as for me, I loved being a CFO. I loved that job. It was fascinating to me because of the business. All the things I just said about the business make it really fascinating for a finance person. You're dealing with a lot of sophisticated financing a lot of equipment. Because of the competitive nature of the business, it's a very cost-focused business. And so, the CFO tends to be the shepherd of the capital of the business and the cost structure of the business. So you can really get into the weeds of it. And because it's an operating business, so there's a lot of activity. We fly, like I said, we have 150 plus airplanes that are each flying, 15 or 14 to 15 hours a day. And moving, last year we moved, 35 million people around the country and into the Caribbean. So all of that activity creates a lot of intrigue. It's very unit driven and all that stuff. So analytical people like myself love that stuff. It's very numbers driven business. So I loved my job. I always thought that would be great. I get to be a CFO here. I love it. What ended up happening is the company, went through a CEO transition in early 2016. The guy that had been here and hired me moved on to other things. Great guy. And then we brought in one of our board members actually to be the CEO at the time. He was a former CEO of an airline called Airtran, which was eventually bought by Southwest Airlines. But he was on our board, which was a great asset to have. And the board said, "Hey, we'd love you to come in and help out." He was at the latter stage of his working career, and so they said, "But part of your job is to find your successor because you're not the long term. You won't be here forever, right?"
Right.
And so they started working with me kind of right around that period of time. To see, and they never make any promises or anything. But do you have the interest? And yeah. And then he acted as my true mentor, and we just spent a lot of time together. The guy's name was Bob Fornero, and I still consider him a close personal friend. We're still in regular contact. And we spent a lot of time together for about 3 years. And over that window of time, he was working to get me ready. And so in January of 2018, they promoted me to the president of the company. So then all the operation reports to the president. So you're really running the airline at that point. So I got a year of doing that while he was still here as CEO. And then in January of 19, he retired, and they kind of passed it off to me. So it's, I've like I said, I've been in this business for almost 20 years. I've worked for 4 CEOs over the course of that period of time, and I've learned something from each one of them. And I can tell you with honesty, I was not ready in January of 2019. And I I still feel like I'm picking up something every day here. I'm not, it's not like I'm calling every shot 100% correct. But one thing that Bob Fernero always told me is nobody's keeping score. So what you've developed is intuition, business savvy. You rely on your team. They're giving you input and insight, and you make a decision based on that. Yeah. And you feel like it's the right decision. And if you're wrong, you fix it. And if you're right, you move on, right? And nobody's keeping score. Your job is to try to shepherd the business as best you can. And that's quite a comforting thought, actually.
Yeah, that's a great story. And, you're in the seat 14 months, right? And then COVID comes along. So yeah, exactly a long training camp for you. But I just want to talk about, so you come from basically being the numbers guy, right? CFO over to CEO, where you still obviously got the numbers component that you're responsible for and you understand, but now you're managing people. Mm-hmm. Right? How many employees does Spirit have roughly?
10,000.
Okay, so you've 10,000 employees and you're managing people in terms of customers, right? But like in terms of your people and your culture, and I know a few people that work for Spirit, and they seem, like you said earlier, they seem very proud of what they're a part of there. And obviously you're based here in South Florida, which, is a big thing for our community. So when people around you who are making a living at a place like Spirit, you learn to appreciate that. And I think the community as a whole is pretty proud of that. You guys are building a big new headquarters in Dania Beach, which is just south of the airport. And so you're transitioning from being a numbers guy, which I can relate to managing people and managing a lot of people. Like I would like to hear about sort of that experience, your leadership style, and to you, like how do you lead? What does leadership mean to you?
Yeah. Well, it's one of the best parts of the job is, you're right. When you're a finance professional, you tend to get lost in the economics or the statistics or whatever. It's easy to find your way, kind of like drifting into that chasm. But this job this business is people. And it sounds cliche. And I didn't mean it that way, but, because we have expensive machines that move people around the world. The airline industry does. But it's a very labor-driven business, right? It's one of the few remaining businesses that still is extremely labor-intensive, and it's face-to-face interaction, and the experience that you have on an airline can be significantly influenced by the experience that you have with the people that you're interacting with. If it's at the call center or at the airport or with the flight attendants on board, any of those things can have a dramatic impact. And so it's very much a people industry. It's moving people, and it's a labor intensive business. And so it's one of the more intriguing and fun things about this job is that I love getting out and talking to all the folks that work with us and the people that travel on us and learn about what's happening. And so whenever I can, I'm on the airplane. And I stand up in front of the cabin and I introduce myself. And I make an announcement. I want the people to know who I am. And I talk with the crew and I talk with the folks at the airport and I listen to what the guests on board have to say. And that to me is the leadership. That's my leadership style. It's just collecting information. I'm a very collaborative kind of leader. My team here at the office, I think, and I'm proud to say it, and I know probably every CEO of every company would probably say this, but I really think it's true. I think we have one of the best management teams in the industry, bar none. I think we overpunch our weight class across the board. And so these people are extremely smart. They're extremely passionate about us. They care about the people who fly on us every day. And so I'm a listener. I like to listen to what they have to say. And that's always been my style. Some people are much more directive in their leadership style. They just set a course and you follow it. I'm a collaborative leader. And there's no right or wrong here. Both of those are directions, but that's the one I've felt the best about. And I think that permeates the way Spirit is. One of the things about being a CEO that you don't appreciate until you get the job is that the tone of the business, the culture of the business is who you said it, like intentionally or not. And so, it was a lot set by my predecessor and my predecessor before that, and now it's mutating based on me. And I think that that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
And I really enjoy that part about it.
So do you think that this collaboration is a means to achieve that buy-in that makes employees tend to feel the most, I guess, motivated and, gratified, I guess, by the, because if you're going to be there 40, 50, 60 hours a week, right, you want to think that what you're doing is meaningful. I feel like that collaboration, and I don't know the management styles of your predecessors, but I'm just curious as if you think that that's a part of it.
Well, it starts, quite frankly, because out of selfishness. And by that, I mean, I don't know everything.
Mm-hmm.
I know that today. I'm not an expert on everything. And so selfishly, I need these people to help me.
Right.
And so it starts there, but what ends up coming of it is what you said, is that they have a voice and they're listened to, and they're getting real input. If you're, whether or not you're the director of planning here, or you're a maintenance manager at Fort Lauderdale Airport, or you're a flight attendant that's based in Las Vegas, I learn something from those people every day. And I tell them that, I get on the airplane and the flight attendants say, "Did you know this is happening?" Nope, didn't know that one, and I get off the airplane, I send an email, "Guys, we got a problem here." And so it's out of selfishness bred, but it ends up being, when the people get the feedback loop, "Oh my God, we made a change here." That feels great, right? It feels pretty good when you're at a company like that. And at least I think so. And so I've always loved working at places like that. And that's why I try to create that environment here as best I can. And it to me, it's just more fun that way.
So what is your collective vision there for Spirit going forward? You guys have obviously expanded a lot of routes, and not being a COVID, going to hopefully taper off at some point, whether it's more the end of this year or in, Q1 or late Q1 next year. Like, what is your overall vision for Spirit going forward?
Yeah, we have a rather modest mission statement, of which a component is to be the most successful airline on earth. So, other than that,
pretty subtle.
Yeah. So, and obviously that's ambitious, as they should be. You don't put a mission out there that's like, it should be pretty good. You want it to be something the group can reach for. But I think we thought a lot about that. And I told you earlier that, and it's not because of Ted Christie. It's not. Mm-hmm. This is a business that can actually transform the way people travel every day. And that's pretty impressive for an industry that's largely mature. We're not reinventing, we're not releasing a new technology every year that's kind of a new whiz-bang technology. Mm-hmm. We're still physical airplanes moving people physically across space. We may do it a little bit more efficiently. We may make your experience a little better, but it's still the same thing. But we think we can do it better than anyone else has ever done it before, because we can be more affordable and we can be more reliable. And so our vision here is to kind of continue to catapult that forward. And that's not by taking market share from other airlines or doing it. We just don't think about our business that way. We're creating opportunity. We're stimulating new travelers with low fares. And that's not just fancy word speak. That's real data-driven information that when we can come into a new market that we fly, that we've never operated before, but it's usually been operated by another airline. So we don't create new routes, okay? We generally lower the fare by about 30%. So whatever is the prevailing fare at the time. And when that happens, good old Adam Smith, the director of kind of economic theory, he was right. more people do it. And on average, it's about 40% more. So if the market's big enough and we can lower the fare low enough, we can stimulate enough people to justify our entry. And that ends up being pretty powerful no matter where you go, because like I said earlier, you're taking this good that used to cost this much and only the top of the pyramid could use it. Right. And you're doing this to it, and now a wider piece of it can be used. And nothing more, even in this time, this difficult time that we're in as a world dealing with this pandemic, but there's nothing more important than connecting with people and your family. And that's why I don't think that's going to change. So that's our goal, is to continue to do that. And we think we can continue to grow in the places we serve and deliver this improved product across, the lower 48, the kind of Caribbean, South America, that sort of thing, and do so for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, that's great. How do you see airline travel changing in the next 10 or 20 years? You see sort of conceptual changes in the cabin and stacking people up like cattle, and I'm not necessarily referring to that only, but I am curious as to how it evolves.
I think first it's going to be much more self-service. At least we're pushing to that. So we're making specific innovations and investments to make it easier for people to interact with us. So ease of use from the time you first touch our product online all the way through the time you claim your bag or deal with now what is a very rare instance where we lose your bag. All of that should be very easy to use. And so the concept of mobile boarding passes isn't that old, to be honest, across the industry, but it's very widely known. But now we've deployed technology at the airport that's also self-service through self-bag tag. We have self-bag drop machines at certain airports, which allow you to kind of walk up to the machine, you drop the bag, it weighs it, scans it, makes sure everything good to go, and sends it on its way. And then recently we introduced biometric validation of the self-bag drop, which means you don't even have to interact with a person to validate your ID. It reads your face, it looks at your ID, makes sure you're the same person. Those kind of things are going to make it easier for people to move through the airport quickly. I think you'll see a lot more of that across the industry, making it a much more seamless transaction. Mm-hmm. And then there'll be constant improvements in that'll be more steady eddy. But over a longer period of time will be recognizable in the efficiency, speed, and comfort on board the airplane that you're delivered to your destination. Mm-hmm. So seat technology is constantly evolving on board airplanes. It's a tremendous investment vehicle for engineering companies to come up with ways to make the seat more comfortable, but also make it lighter weight. Mm-hmm. The airplanes are leaps and bounds more efficient today than they were 25 years ago in fuel burn, speed, reliability, safety. That's going to continue to move forward. So all that stuff, you'll see for sure. But at our core, we're still going to be connecting you with your family. And I don't think that changes.
Yeah. So I'm shifting gears more to a personal level now, but the few times that we've been together, and not surprisingly, I've noticed that running a company like this is very demanding on your time and your energy. How do you balance that with the family that you have? You mentioned you have a couple of daughters and obviously married and your wife. And so like, is there ways in which you try to manage that in that time that you spend with them? And obviously the big responsibility you have not only to your employees and customers, but your shareholders. And I would imagine that takes some intentionality.
It does, and I'm far from perfect at that. Stress management, time management is always a challenge for anyone. This business is a 24/7 by 365-day operation. We're always in the air, and for that reason, I'm always on call. And that's been true my entire career in this business. And all I can say is that my wife is extremely patient, very understanding. And that doesn't come without friction moments, obviously. But I've disrupted numerous family vacations and gatherings as a result, and she always understands. And for that, I'm extremely grateful that I've found that kind of partner in life that she can understand what's going on. But I do my best to find those important moments. You and I have shared a few of those with our daughters, and I make sure that I'm there and I'm present. And we as a family have always been a traveling family, not surprisingly, because of the industry I'm in. And that's what we like to do in the summers, explore. And we usually pick a new place every year and we go together. And that doesn't mean I'm sometimes not on my phone or whatever, but we're there and we're doing something different. And we enjoy skiing as a family. That's the one physical activity that we can all agree on. And so we do that together. And, even if it's 4 hours on the slopes with your daughters, that's time that you're never going to forget. So like I said, I'm far from perfect at it, but my dad always counseled me early on, careers are great. It's nice to be successful and all that stuff, but this window of time is your chance to make a difference in the world, which is you've got 2 young people that are relying on you. And my girls, I couldn't be prouder of who they are. And my wife deserves the vast majority of the credit for that. But being able to watch them turn into these, smart, funny, social, young people, has been probably the greatest achievement of my life by far.
Sure.
And so you just do your best. I know you're in a stressful business too, and you're just trying to make it work. But I can't emphasize it enough. There's nothing, family's got to be number one. And I've done my best over the years to try to emphasize that with them. And that's my best stress relief too.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that in some cases technology is a curse, but it also is a blessing. Like you said, my guess is a lot of us are able to get out and go ski down the slope, right? Because we have the cell phone and we know that because we're on call, in 5 or 10 minutes notice, we can get on and put a fire out if we have to, metaphorically. So for me, that is the case. I think somebody who sits in my seat and is a business consultant and manages transactions that are sometimes tens of millions of dollars, I have to be on call, especially when we're sort of bottlenecking to a conclusion of a closing. I've got to be available. I have Dropbox on my phone. I'm able to access documents, but that's a blessing. And my kids, I've allowed them to sort of buy into that too, which is kind of cool. Like, hey, Daddy, when is that big deal closing? Is it next week? And we can celebrate. And I kind of love that. My 11-year-old daughter,
that's great.
How did she know? But she hears me on the phone. They're listening to me. So
they're pretty smart. They pick up on stuff.
And that's really great. I'm sure your daughters have been keenly aware of what you do for many years. So I see the little guitar behind you. And one of the questions I like to ask people when I work, when I have these calls is, when you're not working, what are you doing? And I understand that you're a music buff, so I'd love to hear a little more about that.
Yeah, I'm kind of a junkie about music, broadly speaking. Always have been a musical person. I've always thought about things in musical ways. I love to sing. I love to listen to music, and I play it. And I started numerous bands in my life and played out live and did a bunch of that. And I still play. And I have a studio in my house that's dedicated to just my toys, and I have too many of them. I'm sorry.
Mainly guitar.
Yeah. I started out playing trombone, actually in middle school, and I fell in love with the idea of having a band.
Yeah.
When you play in that, that you can create something that sounds that good with so many independent moving parts. Mm-hmm. That was really neat to me. The same thing with a choir or something like that it could sound that cool, with so many individuals contributing. And so, trombone wasn't, I played soccer in high school. And so I ended up having to quit. But when I went to college, I wanted to play something because I missed it. And I really wanted to play drums. But putting a drum set or getting a drum set when you're poor and you're living in a dorm just wasn't happening. So it was like, well, I'll pick up this guitar. So I found a friend that had an extra guitar, and he knew the chords, just the bass major chords, and he taught me the chords. And then I taught myself, and it kind of went from there. and now I have, too many of them because I spent too much money on them. But it's for me, it's just, it's a hobby, and I think people generally enjoy music. I like to study it. I like to think about it. I talk to my kids that, if they watch this podcast, they'll know I talk to them all the time about what they're listening to and why, because I think it's a powerful cultural event. I think it's more than just like music. I think it speaks to who you are what you listen to tells a lot about who you are and why. So yeah, it's kind of a thing.
So you mentioned it. What do you listen to? What is your
Well, I migrated over my whole life. And I'm not embarrassed to say, I used to be a hair metal kid. I listened to all that stuff.
Yeah.
And I still do, but I listen to a variety of things. I listen to a lot of hip hop. I listen to this wave of alt country bands that are kind of like a mix between alternative and country music. I really find that stuff fascinating because I like the blend. And that tends to be what I grab. And then there's this kind of genre that I refer to as power pop, which is like driving rock and roll, but it's got a nice melody to it and good harmonies and that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of bands around that I listen to too. So, I have way too much stuff. And in the current environment, in today's world, you don't even have to own music anymore. It's just kind of available. So
interesting that you were you're talking about these sort of different niches that I would call maybe in like the long tail, right? Like this world where Spotify and Apple Music, and before that, the illegal streaming stuff like Napster, changed the paradigm in the business, right? Where it's almost like you don't buy an album anymore. You certainly don't buy physical media. And one of my questions I was going to ask you, like, do you think that that's ruined music? But at the same time, if you're listening to all this stuff, you may not have heard or had access to all the stuff that you listen to now, these different niches and bands that maybe are, on Sirius. I listen to Sirius XMU a little bit, the bands and the stuff that you wouldn't see back in the day. It was all MTV, right? To a lesser degree, H1. So I'm just curious to you, like, what is your perception of, has the streaming music ruined music for us, or is it opened a new frontier, like sort of a net neutral?
Yeah, I think it's two edges to the sword. As an old school guy, one of the things I really loved was going to the record store, flipping, buying the physical product, looking at the liner notes. I would read about, who the producer was, where it was recorded, the technique they used. All that stuff always intrigued me a lot. So I miss the physical interaction with the product. And I also, as a lazy person, you said you listen to like Sirius XMU. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
And I have Sirius in my car, so I listen to a few select stations as well. And one of the things that I enjoy about that too is that there's obviously a producer there who's selecting music for you to listen to. And so having that, that's still a valuable product to me, which is having someone else go out and have to listen to everything and pick the good stuff. Yeah. That's what the old record industry used to be about. Now anybody can put anything out.
Yeah.
You can put anything out. So there's so much material, which is the real positive, but it's just hard to consume because there's so much of it.
Yeah.
So I think it's got two edges to the sword. I don't think someone like Billie Eilish would have existed in my previous world, because she was so odd and and wouldn't have gotten the attention of a traditional kind of A&R person.
Right.
But at the same time, it's like, God, there's so much stuff. I don't know how I'm supposed to filter this, So I think it's got two edges.
Right. You got to find a way to stand out. So it's almost like the more outlandish does in some cases. I just missed the day you said I'd go to Blockbuster Music, put the headphones on and listen to the latest whatever album. But some of my favorite musical experiences were putting a full album on.
Yeah.
I bought my first stereo right before CDs came out. So I had cassette and I had a record player.
Okay.
And, I put Dark Side of the Moon on, which, was made before I was born, but The Wall came out the year I was born. The Pink Floyd fan, also love Fleetwood Mac, and listening to like Rumors from start to finish, just like, who are these people and how do they think up not only the individual songs, but the story that it tells from start to finish. I mean, Roger Waters writing The Wall about his experiences in America on tour, away from home, and all of the things he was exposed to, including crazy fans, to me just tells a story that is so beyond my musical comprehension that you just feel like you don't have that experience anymore. So to your point, we get exposed to a lot more and broaden our base, but I feel like I miss that
You
album.
do lose out on some stuff, right? Do you listen to a whole record anymore?
Occasionally I do, and usually that's 3 a.m. when you know, I'm stressed and I can't sleep, and I'll put on, you know, Delicate Sound of Thunder from Pink Floyd, and it makes me think of those days and years. You know, I know people still make albums. Maybe they are great from start to finish. I just don't listen to them digitally, I guess.
Yeah, I'm like you. I will listen to my collection periodically in full album form, start to finish. But I don't consume new music that way, which is, I think, the point you're making, and I miss that. But I don't know what to do about it other than evolve. You know.
Yeah, right. Evolve is a good point.
Yeah.
So you got a few more minutes left. I'm just kind of running down a couple of quick questions. Do you like sports at all? Do you follow any particular teams?
I do. Yeah. I was, the early part of my life, I was a north side of Chicago kid. So we lived in one of the suburbs on the north side before we moved to Phoenix. And I've never, unfortunately, although more recently it's been fortunately, but I've never been able to shake it. And so I've been a Cub fan my whole life. I've been a Bear fan my whole life. And, finally in 2016, we finally took care of business.
Yep.
I still passionately follow that. I really like baseball because it's, because of the history. And again, getting back to who I am, an analyst at heart, it's very metric driven, high volume game, 162 games, a lot of activity, a lot of statistics, a lot of trending. That stuff is kind of fun. That's generally, and I went to a Pac-12 school in Arizona. I went to the University of Arizona, and we have a strong basketball program and always have. You mentioned Krzyzewski earlier, and we had our own guy out there named Lute Olson, who recently passed away, by the way, but built that program. And so I still follow college basketball in that regard, but tend to be a north side of Chicago kid.
I don't blame you. The Cubbies are a neat franchise. I got a chance to visit Wrigley for the first time in 2015, which I think was the year before they won the World Series, the Game 4 of the NLCS. And what a special experience. And I think that many sports fans probably don't get that same type of, in the neighborhood, classic ballpark.
It's one of my happy places, man. I for the longest time I've been going up there, for a game or two a year. I haven't been able to go the last few years. I got to go in 2016. I got to go to the NLCS, and I got to go to the World Series, which was an awesome experience. But it's a great place. A day game at Wrigley is one of the best, things you can do.
That playoff experience in baseball. I grew up watching the Braves because that's who was on TV here. And so, and so they'd lost 100 games a year until one year I'm 14 years old, and they go from worst to first and go to the World Series. And just watching every pitch, that energy of, the crowd noise and Tim McCarver's voice. And, it reminded me of being in a little league, and you could smell the grass in the infield. And I think the Cubs are probably the one of the ultimate classic franchises in all of sports, let alone baseball. So what I would love to hear any advice you have to aspiring entrepreneurs, like people that I work with, lower middle market, businesses that are, maybe making money and getting by and succeeding, but, advice that you have from your macro experience where you are.
That's the skill set that I've always been, I've always admired, and I don't have. I'm not a true entrepreneur. I know some, and I'm always fascinated and humbled by being around people like that. If you have the guts to kind of build your own business and run it, I don't care what size it is. That takes a tremendous amount of constitution to do that. I run a business that exists, but it's hard to do that, to create your own idea and get it to fruition. But I think one thing that I've always said about Spirit and my other companies I work for, and I've said it about myself, is I'm never going to get outworked. I'm not the smartest kid on the block, but I'm not going to get out hustled by my peers in the industry or the people around here, because I think they're watching every day as to whether or not I'm paying attention, and I think that applies. The creativity around being an entrepreneur is not something that I can replicate or comment on, but I think you can't let yourself get out hustled. You can't, because you can fall into a trap. And so, your business, your idea, or the people who work for it are relying on you. Yeah. It's and they're watching, by the way, either, subconsciously or consciously. So, that's the one piece of advice I always tell people is, do not get out hustled, do not get outworked. And it can be exhausting sometimes, but people want to know that you're there. And
I think one thing that's helped me the most, I've always been willing to put the work in, but really putting the additional work in preparation has helped me in my career. And I know preparation is not a new concept, but really taking the time to study everything before I get into the meeting, as opposed to waiting for the meeting to produce meaningful outcomes. So that hustle, when you say that word, to me, it speaks to, and largely, not only, but largely to preparation and being ready for what's around the corner. And I don't know if
smart.
Anticipated COVID, but you did mention that you had some other, sort of issues and similar, outbreaks in the past, and perhaps that, preparation has helped you, with that. But just in closing, a lot of us had some time on our hands during the COVID lockdown and all that stuff. I'm curious to hear if you had any type of obscure movie recommendation or Netflix, Amazon binge watching recommendation. I think that's like our common language these days, is like,
it is.
People like,
it is. I use some of that time to catch up on series that I missed. My wife and I usually pick one that we watch together from start to finish. It gives us a chance to relax at the end of the night. Right now we're chipping away at Ray Donovan. Most people have probably already seen that. But when I'm on my own, I also have one that I watch on my own because I know my wife won't like it. So the one I would recommend I'm watching right now is called Money Heist.
Okay.
It's on Netflix. It's a Spanish series, so it's in Spanish. But the subtitles you'll get used to and that sort of thing. And it's really good. It's a bank robbery type series, but it's again about people and it's, it's about a plan. They create this really sophisticated plan. I like those kind of things, where you got this like detailed plan. So I would recommend.
I find a lot of series, and my wife and I have just like that. I have my own, and she doesn't like violence. So, sometimes I'll like I'm watching Narcos, the first Narcos now, which I absolutely love.
So great.
And
so great.
I can't wait to go into the Mexico one, but on the Escobar, I feel like they do such a great job with the writing. But a lot of times we find that we're watching a show and it's really captivating for like the first season, and then it gets very repetitive and cliche. Like, Bloodline was one we loved, and then it was just like it got either too dark and obscure, or the same person gets kidnapped 14 times and escapes. It's like, you just have to be through that, but like Breaking Bad and Sopranos to me were two of the best all time, streaming series. And it's amazing how that market has grown from basically House of Cards, I think was the first one. And it's $8 million. And now it's literally billions and billions between Amazon and Netflix and Hulu and all those. And it's just absolutely fascinating. But the content is so much better than your traditional network, formulaic cliche series that, it's nice to watch, especially, at night, you spend a little time with your wife and get to watch a little something that's, quality. It's only an hour.
I actually really
watching a movie.
I look forward to that. Yeah. I look forward to it every day. I get done with work. We come home, we make a dinner. We speak to the kids. They go off and do their homeworks, and she and I have a chance to just relax on the couch. So it's like I got an hour to kind of decompress. It's actually quite nice.
Exactly. Thank you so much for doing this. It's exactly the kind of, dialogue that I'm looking for. And, I know it's a hectic time for you guys, but the conversations we had before this just compelled me to reach out and ask you to do the show, because I just know that these types of conversations and your experiences there will resonate with the audience that I'm appealing to. So I appreciate you doing that and your time.
Well, I appreciate you inviting me. I don't know if anyone heard anything interesting, but it was sure great to talk to you for a while too. So I appreciate it.
I'm positive that it will resonate with the crowd, and look forward to getting the feedback when it's out there in probably about a month or so. So
cool.
Again, Ted, appreciate you, man.
You got it.